G'day, Dana. How are you, mate?
Very good, Daniel. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, and I'm really glad you could make it on. Look, it'd be great for you just to give us a quick sort of 1 minute or 2 minute version of the Dana Dolan story, how we got to here, and sort of what you're doing at the moment.
Sure. Thank you. Yes. So, originally from Central California, and I grew up in Fresno County, just east of Fresno. And as a local fellow there, went to school at Fresno State and found myself trying to earn some money through university. So I started selling cable television door to door. Eventually started my own little team doing that and got a contract in Illinois. And that was my first foyer into the business world. Handed that business over to my business partner because I really didn't see myself living in Southside Chicago really for the rest of my life. So that was good for the business partner and good for me. Got back to university, went through university, California State University, Fresno, um, and ended up in quite a few corporate roles, mainly publicly traded organizations, pharmaceutical, medical device companies. Met my wife, ended up here in Melbourne in the year 2000. So my first son born in California, my second son, Finn, born here in Melbourne. But through that journey, mostly working for publicly traded organizations, had a lot of success, learned a lot, did find myself getting frustrated over and over with maybe just the lack of progress that those companies were making, and I guess really their adherence to their own values, and really ultimately the service of patients, particularly in the medical industry. Transitioned from truly corporate publicly traded roles into working for private equity owned businesses, where I found that emphasis on performance to be a little bit more suited to me. And found success, had a lot of fun. Ultimately, though, found that there was not much gratitude. It was great when you um, got a business to its exit, or helped it meet what it wanted to do or its objective in the short term. But the long-term benefits that were provided to either patients or the employees of those organizations um, disappeared shortly thereafter. So when I found EOS, which is just simply a simple set of tools and a proven process to help people get what they want from their business, I found that I could directly help Australian business owners in a short period of time and help a lot of them at the same time. And that I fell in love with that instantly, and have transitioned immediately to doing that. And that's what I do full time now, is help business owners however I can, whether that's through EOS or if it's just private one-on-one mentoring and just helping out mates. That's what I do. That's what I love to do. And that's what I do full time now. So that's a really abridged version of the journey, Daniel.
Cool. And look, I'm keen to dive into EOS a little bit, or the Entrepreneurial Operating System. We'll talk a bit about that as well, because there's something I've come across. But before we get there, I want to sort of go back, and a lot of your experience is in that sales world, is in sort of, generating that front end of an organization. What drew you, or why did you sort of get passionate about the sales end, which, to be honest, some people find the hardest part of an organization?
It does go back to my origins. In university, I finished playing sport, which meant I had to find income, pay for university. And I found it was a really fun way to earn a living. And that was getting paid to talk to people, to meet people. I loved it. I fell in love with it at that point. I fell in love with the science behind it, and really tried to master every aspect of sales, which in the end to me is just helping others, educating others, helping others find ways to solve problems. So I've always felt that that's the best place for myself in businesses and being able to help others. But it does go back to effectively going door to door to help people that oftentimes there was language barriers and socio economic demographic barriers, and overcoming those barriers was really fun and gratifying to me. I loved it, still love it, helping people to this day. I find it fun. I find it simple, but not easy. And that's another thing I do love about it, is that it isn't easy, and I love that part of it.
Well, so that's interesting. You find it fun, and easy. It's or simple. Sorry, not easy. But why do you think other people find it so challenging? Why do you think other people sort of get worried about that? Particularly the part you mentioned that sort of struck me was this reaching out to people cold, where there's a barrier. There's already a bunch of obstacles to overcome. How do you sort of prepare yourself for that, or what are some of the things that you do to get over that?
It's just that um, I guess it does. It comes back to empathy, and it's probably one of the reasons why you and I have connected. But um, there are problems out there, and you want to help people, and to do that, you've got to understand where they're coming from, what their obstacles are, and you got to help them. And I just find that truly fun. And a lot of times it's totally true. You're trying to help people who don't even see that there is a problem at all, and you're competing with a lot of noise out there, people that are just trying to make money and not solve problems. Pardon me, Daniel. So I guess on that note is, there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of challenge to get that done, but when you get it done, it's a truly great feeling, and that's what I love. And it's truly helping others. So I guess the empathy side of sales is really there. So I'm going to do a total misquote on this, Daniel, and you'll have to correct me, but I think it was I think it was Abraham Lincoln who said, if you don't like somebody, you need to take the time to get to know them. So that's kind of what sales is really like. So a lot of people might be resistant to your solution, but you've got to find out what makes those people tick and how you can help them if there's an opportunity to help them. So that's what I love to do.
Yeah, you're right. There is a lot of resistance and challenge, and I think the mindset of helping people is really important. Often I'll hear people use language like, "Oh, that person's a target," or they're the person I need to convert them. The language you use around sales sometimes, and I know it's not necessarily meant as that sort of a we're going to shoot the person, but yeah, that's the sort of language that people use sometimes that for me sends up those red flags that potentially we're not actually caring about the person, right?
Correct. And it is definitely, the language is out there. It's still out there. There's a lot of things that, if you use, say, target market, that just means you need to know who it is you need to speak to about this. Who's going to get benefit from this? So, for example, with EOS, typically I don't talk to government, and I don't talk to people in organizations or leading organizations with maybe more than 500 seats, because they're really not going to get as much benefit. They might contract out a lot of the different aspects of EOS, for example. So yeah, it's the choice in words that is really poor. Target market is an awful choice of words, no doubt about it. But it does come back to helping people. What people can you help with your solution? And I'd really encourage people to think about that rather than talking to everybody, because that's part of that noise we get out there, and that's why we get resistant.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's dive into EOS, because for those who aren't familiar, probably the best introduction to this would be Gino Wickman's book, Traction. Would you agree?
I definitely would agree with that. I've got the chance to spend some time with Gino Wickman, and he is everything that he writes about and composes. Pardon me. He's written a few books. Get a Grip is also, for those that maybe aren't into reading as much, it's a great book to listen to on a podcast, and it goes through more of a fable on how you implement EOS in your business, and really gives a really good understanding. So Traction, definitely number one. If you're a reader, if you're not a reader and you're more of a listener, Get a Grip's a great book. And then there's a book that's only been released in February, Daniel, called Shine. And that really helps entrepreneurs maybe just strip back those layers of ego that often develop in entrepreneurs. One of the best books I've read ever. And it's a business related book because it's about entrepreneurs, but it's definitely more about self-development. So yes, first introduction, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent, is Traction, certainly.
Yeah, no, that's great. And look, I remember reading the book and getting a lot from it. A good friend of mine, John Sermon, passed me a copy. And I guess from your perspective, who's the person who probably needs to pick that book up, so we can sort of help people know, is this something I should be even thinking about? How would you describe that persona of the individual who sort of might need a bit of EOS support?
Yep. Really simply, maybe business owner that either plans to be or already is managing a business or leading a business of 10 to say 500 seats, open-minded, really important. If you're not going to be open-minded, there really is no point picking up that book. Okay. More scared of staying the same than changing in the future. Again, willing to be open, honest. Those are the types of people that need to pick up the book, should pick up the book. They'll get a lot of benefit from it, and they'll be able to apply a lot of those things in their business immediately. Really that very next day, they'll be able to apply things in their business that are going to make their business a lot better. But that's the criteria. It's agnostic, any industry. Again, it's really designed for the entrepreneurial business, because realistically, there isn't much else out there. I can vouch for you. Don't bother going to get an MBA in entrepreneurship, because you're not going to find what you find in Traction in your MBA program.
And so, what are some of the, I guess, symptoms or the sort of challenges that people might be having, that this is sort of a good starting point in terms of getting to a solution?
Yep. I'll throw out some discoveries that Gino made that are still absolutely fact and true to this day. There's nothing in EOS or Traction that is not based on fact. There is no theory in Traction. So I come from a healthcare background. That's really important for me, that I talk evidence-based. So that's what EOS is. It's evidence-based. It works in over 200,000 organizations now. But what he found back in the day is that out of 20, 1 in 20 entrepreneurial businesses is truly great. It means they're working their guts out and they're getting reward and they're living a balanced life by doing that. They're getting exactly what they want from their business. The reality is 19 of 20, or the average business, is not. So what we find, in that situation is the difference between the two is what EOS is really written about, and the book Traction is written about, is the difference between those truly great companies and the 19 companies that are working their guts out. They might be succeeding, they're just not getting everything out of the business that they should. One of the key differences is that all businesses wrestle with around 136 issues at any given time, any week. Those truly great businesses, what they're doing is they're getting to the root cause or the source of those issues. They're solving them for good, and they're finding newer, bigger, better, more impactful issues, and that is causing their business to grow, and it's keeping their business under control. So it's one of the discoveries. But to your question, the common frustrations, the symptoms of people who need to pick up Traction: lack of profit, lack of growth. The most common one, people problems, that feeling that they've tried everything and that just nothing has worked. Nothing is working. When people get to that point and that feeling, they need to read Traction, and they're going to feel a whole heap better.
Absolutely. The thing that struck me was that it does a good job at setting out, I guess, the balance between the tangible steps you need to take. So what are the practical frameworks and tools and all those sorts of things, but how those also relate to those people problems. And I think this is something that I find in my own work, that people sort of go, oh, I've got people issues, so we just have to solve. If you've got to fix the culture. And then they'll say, "Oh, I've got an operating problem. I just got to fix the process." But they don't think that these two things actually interact, and it's the interaction of those two things that often cause the problems in each side. Any experience, or have you seen that sort of play out in your experience,
Well,
Dana?
yeah, that is fact. So it's not a coincidence that those interplay. Yes. So when we talk about setting a vision, probably the most overused word in business is vision. So when we talk about vision in EOS, we're talking about 8 questions. The very first one is, what are your core values? Right? The very first one. And every business, whether they have them written down or not, has core values. And even if they have them written down, if their behavior doesn't reflect them, they're going to have issues. And there's no doubt about it. And those issues aren't good issues. They're not solvable without having a deep dive, knowing what your core values are and living and breathing those core values, because everything hinges on that. So when we implement, and while it is quite prescriptive in terms of what those 8 questions are, every company is different. And you need to go on a deep dive of what those values are, and they're absolutely going to affect everything else in your business. So when we talk about setting your vision, values being the number one thing we do, once we start talking about people, really the first thing we do is we bring back those values and say, okay, are we talking to those people about our values every month? Are we having a one-on-one that says, hey, these are our 5 values. This is what we saw. Or here's an example over here of what Daniel did. That really represented our values. Over here, when we had dinner the other night and you didn't say thank you to the waitress, well, that's not really our values. If we have those conversations, just giving a presentation I gave the other day, I'll talk about, if we have those conversations frequently, we don't have to read the big Harvard Business Review articles on how to have difficult conversations. So if we're doing that often, we avoid those people problems, absolutely. So the two are absolutely linked. It all comes back to values.
Yeah, I want to dive more into it because, as you probably know, I'm pretty passionate about this idea of values, and the thing I find that most people do well is pick 5 nice words that they say they sound good. Let's put them on a poster, and they can be our values. As you said, the challenge is the small things, and I want to hone in on the waitress conversation piece because my guess would be about 95% of organizations, if someone was at dinner and their colleague said something to a waitress which wasn't quite, aligned to their values, most people would go, in the back of their mind, they'd go, well, that wasn't very, generous or great. That wasn't displaying gratitude or whatever the case might be, but they wouldn't say it. They wouldn't say it out loud. And I guess my question is, why don't they say it out loud? And why do we need to say it out loud?
Yeah, that's good questions. There's a lot in there to unpack, really. The why we don't do it, everybody needs to ask themselves that question. Because if we go back to the fundamental of having a solid, good team, it all comes down to trust. 100% always comes back to trust. If you trust in the process and you know that trust is built that way, you call it out. It is easier to avoid it. And that's really that slippery slope of the band-aids, the workarounds, whether it comes to process or anything else. While we don't do it, there's not a good reason. Why we should do it, I can give you 1 million.
Yeah. And look, I think the easy flow on is, hey, if I can do it there when it's sort of not a big deal, maybe the person sort of goes, oh, yeah, okay, I'll take that feedback on board. What about when we're in the meeting room next week and the person does a similar thing to a colleague? What about when we overhear them talking to a customer or client in the same sort of way? Does it get any easier then? Probably not.
It's going to get harder. There's no doubt. Then I'm going to go back to your original question on this. A lot of people have values and they don't observe those values, which to me is even worse than not having values. You shouldn't have values then. So if we take one called integrity, you see it a lot, right? That's what I call permission to play, meaning don't even walk through the door if you don't have integrity. I'm not going to put that on the wall. That's permission to play. Don't even come here if that's the situation. So living and breathing those values is the most critical aspect. You don't just set them, go through the pain of setting those values to not live them. You've got to live them. So again, those are just permission to play. And the more you avoid making sure that you live and breathe those, the much bigger those problems get. And that's the purpose of having a one-on-one, is to talk about that. These are our values, these are your roles, and this is your scorecard. This is how you're going. And we need to have that conversation often. And as cool as you and I are having it right now, those are great opportunities to say, hey, you were eating lunch the other day and you got up and left all your waste sitting there for somebody else to pick up. And that's just not how we do things. That's the great opportunity to do that. And that's not that hard. What really is hard is 3 months down the road, you've got a very upset team because someone doesn't meet your values. Then you've got some problems.
Yeah, and I want to dive into this more because the EOS is a great system because I think of the frameworks and the structure, and it really does set a good sort of lattice, I think, for an organization to be able to start to follow the steps and build that infrastructure. But these values are quite intangible in some ways, and it's a good example, I think, of leaving your waste. If our value is excellence, for example, well, then we can have the conversation. That's not what excellence looks like. And they might go, oh, but I do it with my clients. I just don't do it at lunch. But I guess your point is, well, if I can have the conversation at lunch, it makes it much easier to have the conversation everywhere. Or it becomes apparent that this person doesn't really believe excellence is a core value for them, right?
Right. So excellence again, to me, that probably is still in that domain of permission to play. But with
Yeah,
that specific example you just used, we borrow a lot from Jim Collins at EOS, and particularly if you go back to Good to Great, we're talking about the right person in the right seat. And what you just described there is that that person might be the wrong person, meaning they don't have your values, but they're in the right seat. They might be brilliant at what they do, but you got to have both. You can't have a wrong person in the right seat. That person's, you've got to give them enough feedback that they can change, or you're going to have to take action and get them out of your organization. The sooner, the better. And I really urge my clients when they have that situation is to make that change, not just for them. It's not a, it's, it's really selfish to keep that person on board when they're not a fit for the organization.
yeah,
Really super,
absolutely.
super selfish. So the best thing for that person is to get them somewhere where their values do match the organization, where excellence is everything, or maybe just hitting your number is everything. So good example, Daniel. Yeah, absolutely. That sounds a lot to me like the wrong person in the right seat. Wrong
Yeah.
persons are quite serious. Those are
Yeah.
things you make a lot of change with.
Absolutely, and I want to dive on that because this is, I think, one of the challenges that you'd probably see a lot, which is we've got someone who's a high performer. They hit their numbers, they get the results, and as an entrepreneur, as a leader, I can get quite fond of seeing those numbers, quite worried that if I let those numbers go, or if I exit that person, who's going to pick up that slack? But this to me sounds a bit like the pirates metaphor that I talk about quite a lot. It's not having that right direction, or having that right culture. Why should we get rid of this person? Let's say put a scenario around it. We've got a salesperson. They're like 10% above target every month. They're kicking the goals that we've asked them to kick, but they're a bit prickly, or they don't meet our values, or there's other things going on. Leave the lunch area as messy, thinking someone else can clean that up for me. I've got to go and make my numbers. Why? How do you talk to a client when they want to hold on to those results, but you're suggesting we have to get rid of that person? Maybe might not be the right fit for this organization.
Firstly, there are people out there that will meet your values and also get those results. And the longer you avoid replacing that person, the longer it is going to be before you can have that situation. On top of that, those types of people are eating away at your culture bit by bit in ways you can't even see and understand. And yeah, I don't want to use really harsh words when I say that, but there is a descriptive word. I don't like it. But yeah, they've got to go, and they will destroy and eat away at your organization.
Yeah, they create that tension that holds everyone back, right? And from experience, I've seen those salespeople who get their numbers because they actively stomp down on others around them, or sabotage and take clients off the other salespeople. And again, not addressing that sort of behavior is really the issue. The other thing that really struck me with the whole EOS framework is how we have really robust discussions around issues and around problems and around making sure we address them. And I want to talk about this because particularly when it comes to dealing with people issues, my experience is when someone's not doing a technical thing or there's numbers missing, we're all happy to have a chat about it because the issue's sort of over there on a spreadsheet. When there's people issues, though, I tend to see people get very reluctant to comment, to openly speak, to sort of address those issues. So, talk to me about how you help organizations, I guess, deal with people issues more effectively. Maybe as a build on what we've already been talking about, or something sort of different in that space.
Yeah, so what I do is I work with leadership teams, and so goes the leadership team, so goes the organization, particularly when it comes to culture and values. So I introduce really simple tools. They're everything in EOS is simple; it's just not easy. But really, that's just your values on one part of the chart, people's names in another part of the chart, and we start with leaders, and we measure their values, and we conduct real-time appraisals on values in boardrooms with each other. And we extend that and cascade that through the organization. So we're constantly always talking about values. When an issue comes up, and it does come up, where it might be Mike, wrong person. It's an issue. We talk about it as a leadership team, and we address it, and we help the people address it and give them the tools they need to have that discussion with things of examples that come from other departments or other areas of the business, so that they can have that discussion, and most importantly, give that person the support they need to be aware, firstly, that they don't meet the values or they're not meeting the values. A lot of people like to use the word leopards don't change their spots. And while that is often the case, you want to give those people as much information as possible to understand if they're in the right place or not. But definitely becomes part of the culture. Talking about values becomes part of the culture, meaning it's as important as anything you do. It's the first thing you do. It makes its way to the issues list, and we don't stop talking about it because it's so important. We prioritize it. And if that's the whole subject of a meeting, that's a whole subject of a meeting, because meetings, when you're on EOS and you're running on EOS, meetings are where you get work done rather than just meet. So issues get solved and a plan gets put in place and a to-do gets put in place to make sure that that person understands their feet, how they're not meeting the values of an organization. So it's a primary activity of an EOS implementer like me, or self-implementing businesses, to ensure that they're talking values all the time.
Yeah, and it becomes a reinforcing loop, because I think you're right. Sometimes we have to talk to them about it, because when we put a word or a couple of words down and say they're our values, it's not always clear on what exactly that means. And there can be open interpretation, for example. Like, what does being courageous mean? Does that mean, someone could interpret that as, going over the top and being overly enthusiastic, or saying things that are a bit edgy. And maybe that is what you meant, and maybe it's not what you meant. And that's where the leadership team probably has to take that accountability to say, did we clarify? Are we clear on what we mean when we say that? Have you sort of come across those sorts of issues at times?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That will also go back to permission to play. Values. That's why the discovery of values, defining an organization's values, is so important, to really discover them, because they're always there and they're always unique to that organization, and defining those and constantly talking about those. So it's how you hire people, it's how you fire people, it's how you conduct your reviews, it's how you open presentations to the wider group. It is always present, it is always there, and it's crystal clear what your values are, so everybody knows. So you can say, hey, remember when you came on board, we talked about these things that are sacrosanct in our organization? Well, when you left your rubbish, that kind of goes against that. It doesn't kind of go against it. As a matter of fact, it does, and we can't have it here. We cool? We clear? We understand? Great. So having that conversation is quite easy, right? Waiting on that and not having that conversation till it's 2 a.m. text messages that are rude to other people. That's where that goes if you don't do that.
Yeah, there's the frustration that builds up. What are some of the examples maybe you've seen of values where you've gone, oh, I love that one. That not necessarily because it's yours, but one that was really clear, really sort of punchy, or helped really set a tone for an organization. Have you got any favorites?
Yeah, it is a bit situational. My favorite is a client own money. so own money, and theirs is being brave. So they're going to take on any client, and they talk about being brave, a little bit like the courageous comment you use, but they define it really well. And taking on EOS, they're brave. They'll have any conversation anytime with anybody. So they've just taken their leadership meetings from just the leadership team with a closed door, which is typical with an EOS implementation. And then the leadership team cascades that out into the organization. Well, they're so brave, and I love it, is now their weekly meetings or their EOS meetings, their L10 meetings, everybody in the organization's in them. No holds barred, no secrets, be brave. I love it. So, brave on its own can be just being brave. That could be being risky. That could be a lot of things. But in their case, it's getting people prosperity, taking on people who are really struggling to get finance in different places, but being brave and taking on those clients. So it works really well for that client of mine, so well that they're trusting in the EOS process. It can be scary as well, and they're just flying, growing faster than I can even keep up with. So it's a really good example of being brave in their context. Works really well for them. That's probably my favorite, only because that's just it's recent this week. It just comes to mind because I'm just so proud of those guys and what they're doing, because they're doing some amazing things, and it's all credit to them because they are trusting the process and they're being brave. They're living their own values, and the consequences of it are truly amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, you're really passionate about this space of helping businesses. As an EOS implementer, it's a big job. You basically go in cold in many cases, sort of not knowing too much about the organization or the people, and you've got to build all these relationships. You've got to take them through what is a challenging process, and not without investment and required and time required by them. What really excites you about that? What keeps you going and doing all of that effort?
It's definitely the results, and people getting a grip on their business. And there's, everybody's going to have a different long-term plan. So we call that a 10-year plan. It's probably one of the most important things we do in that vision piece. There's different reasons people come to EOS. It could be because they want to exit. It could be because they want to move to Queensland, and really they want the business to manage itself. So there's a lot of different reasons, but it's helping those people get a grip on their business so they get what they want, and whatever that may be. One business might want an office in every major city around the world. Another client just simply wants a revenue figure. Another client I have just wants to be in their space, the most prestigious company in that space. That's all they're worried about. That's all they care about. I just got to plug in a second here.
It's okay.
So yeah, that's what really turns me on. And when we get aligned with business owners that have that same feeling, they know that that's what I'm there for. It's definitely not easy. The feedback I give is very direct. It needs to be, because I'm not doing anybody any favors by not being that direct. A lot of times we have entrepreneurs, I have them now and love them dearly, but they'll make snap decisions. And we go back to the old adage that making a decision is better than not making a decision, no matter what it is. But slowing people down enough to say, well, we're not at the root cause of that issue just yet. So this is our problem. We're going to keep going. Who, what, when, why, till we get to the very heart and soul of this problem, because we are not talking about this twice. We're going to solve it, and we're going to find new things. And what we do is we end up getting to the point where the biggest problem they have is, where are we going to have our Christmas party? That's the point we get to when we're solving all the big, hairy, nasty problems. But when you're working with entrepreneurs, you'll find that they want to make quick decisions. They're very decisive. They're very direct. And we've got to really slow that down to say, hang on, you're becoming the bottleneck here, which entrepreneurs, most of the time, they are the bottleneck in their own organization, because they have not delegated effectively, and they don't know how to do that. So they've got to learn these skills, and they need that feedback. They need that feedback from someone typically external. There's an old mathematician who came up with the theory that is fact. That is, you can't be part of a system and also understand that system. So being external, yes, you come in, and a lot of the businesses I work in, I don't have those expertise that they do. Certainly from a technical point of view, I have a lot of tech clients. That is in to my benefit. And that's what helps me be more valuable to those organizations so that I can step back out of the system and help them also get out of the system and view their business just like they would be sitting on a board.
Yeah, and I think that's so right. I remember a Simon Sinek video where he said, I'm the idiot. I come in and I don't understand, and so I ask questions. And actually, a lot of people have the same questions. They're just afraid to ask because they don't want to feel silly, right? And so having that external, I think this is why, EOS on its own, and I know a lot of people can try and implement that on their own, but having that external support, someone who can guide them, challenge, so often when I talk to organizations and leaders about feedback, feedback only goes in one direction. It only goes down. Like it's a leader giving feedback down to somebody. And it just makes no sense that feedback doesn't go up because that's where a lot of the decisions are going to be made. And I think, you've described it really well that when we're making decisions, we want to have the right information, we want to have the right people. We also want to understand the right drivers. What's that root cause? And I think that's where, for me, the link with data-driven decision making and empathy comes in because data-driven decision making gives us all of the numbers that we can put into that decision. But empathy gives us a lot of those psychological drivers, those emotional drivers, and even some of those values-based drivers. Do you ever see that where there's a decision which mathematically or numerically looks really straightforward, but then when you bring the values in, it gets a little sketchy?
Yeah, definitely. Especially this day and age. So if we go back to prehistoric time when there really were no numbers, they wouldn't have had this issue. But now we've got the exact opposite problem where we've got too many numbers. Most of my clients are looking at the wrong numbers. I really try to get them to focus on 5 to 15 numbers that are truly going to give them a snapshot and then cascade that through the organization. So one of the problems I'll see from an empathy point of view is if we're looking at lagging indicators, like we're just going to look at the revenue for the month. Well, that's not really going to help the person that's responsible for getting the revenue that month, right? But if we go back to the leading indicators, like how many leads they got from their certain marketing campaign, we really got to step back. So I really get guys to step back. Let's go back to the very beginning, get to the leading indicators where when we raise an issue, like we're not getting the leads we need, we can fix that issue and we can help and we can move the business forward. So yeah, that disconnect, it's quite a serious one because you can't help somebody with a lagging indicator. You need leading indicators to have empathy, to understand where they're struggling, where you can help them. It's quite a serious issue. This can really get me passionate on a subject like this. But yeah, looking at the wrong numbers is a really serious problem right now in a lot of businesses because there's so much information out there. Again, you really got to challenge yourself to get to the bottom of that issue. What comes before the revenue? What comes before the lead even? Yeah, there's a lot, when you get businesses talking that way, that there's a light bulb that clicks off, an aha moment, then they can just start to scratch the surface of real issues, get those issues solved, and really start to grow the business and get forward. So the numbers can be a really misleading thing in businesses.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you would have seen this in your sales career, right? That people go, "Oh, well, it's because they're not making enough calls." And so if we just tell them they have to make more calls, then we'll get the numbers will flow through. But of course, if the attitude I'm taking to those calls is deflated because I'm being treated poorly and no one seems to support me and I'm feeling like worn out, I could make 10 times as many calls and get just as poor a result. And
Yep.
that's really what we're talking about, right? Is what's that? The root cause isn't always just a number in a spreadsheet. It's making sure that you're understanding the right pieces of information.
Correct. And especially here in Australia, we're little, there's no doubt about it. But between Queensland and Victoria, totally different set of beliefs and values and cultures within different industries. So it's really not going to ever be just a one size fits all. One of the symptoms we have of being global organizations is most of our strategies are going to come from Europe or North America. We're going to ask people to go out and execute on those strategies without really any regard to not just Australian beliefs and values, but the different subsets of beliefs and values we have. So, the go get the CEO signature straight away. That's just what you need to go and do. It just doesn't work that way here in Australia, and it doesn't work that way. Queensland's going to be a lot different than Victoria in that regard. There's a whole process that's going to be completely different in each of those states. Empathy for that and helping people along that process is really critical if you want to be successful.
Yeah,
And, if you don't want to make people's lives miserable as well.
yeah, and which usually go hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
Look, I've got a few of my empathy card questions. I often take these conferences and events and ask, put them out so people can have their conversations a bit deeper than just the usual. So, what do you do for work? Here's one for you. If you could go back and change one decision in your career, what would it be and why?
Wow, just one. There's quite a few, Daniel. So in my case, yeah, early on when I knew things didn't match my values, and I found myself in that situation multiple times, didn't take action and change my surroundings. And there's been plenty of places like that, either where I loved the values, loved the work, but the company really wasn't living those values at all, or just simply there was no values at all, and there just wasn't a values match. Taking action sooner for me, career wise. So for me, again, when I came across EOS values, which suit me to a T, happiest I've ever been because I'm living the values that suit me. That's advice I give everybody, clearly as an EOS implementer, but I think that would help a lot of people be a lot happier. That's just one decision, but I probably made that indecision many times, so I know that's a tough one.
Oh, look, I am almost 100% positive that we people who listen to this who'll be sitting there going, "Oh, I don't at all align with my organization's values," and like you, I would encourage them to consider taking some action pretty quickly. What's something you're proud of but don't often talk about?
Um, Proud of that don't often talk about. Gosh, I guess I'd say my wife. That's really horrible, isn't it? Yeah, I'm very proud of my wife. She's yeah,
But is it
she
horrible because you're proud of her, or horrible because you don't talk about it?
probably it's because I don't talk about it enough.
Okay,
So
good.
yeah, definitely super hard worker. She does work. She chooses me. I guess that's why I'm most proud. But it's what she does on a day-to-day basis that is amazing, and I couldn't do half of what she does in a day. But in terms of her work and the amount of tasks she completes and her diligence, and she's got a lot of strengths I don't have, or is definitely not as strong in. So I guess if she took the time to listen to this, I don't know if she will, but she does. She'll find out. I'm very proud.
Oh, that's great. And last one, it might be the same answer. Who's someone you really admire and why?
Um, Gosh, lots of people really admire. Yeah, for me, it's all based at home. My youngest, no, my oldest boy, right now is he's in school, working full time, getting his master's in psychology, and again, he's taking on things that I didn't do at that age in terms of it was really just an appetite for the work and ethic that he's got. Really admire that at that age, and that can be tough. So he's living in the country, scraping by, getting through school, and I'm really proud.
Oh, it sounds like he's got good foundations with you and your wife to build on, mate. So well done to both of you. And thank you so much. Look, I'm going to pop your LinkedIn profile, but if people want to get in touch, how should they reach out? I'm a massive advocate for entrepreneurs. If you've got a business, you're struggling, you're not sort of getting those runs on the board you want, EOS is a great place, and having a really quality implementer like yourself is a great thing to do. So how should we get in touch with you?
Yeah, just if you pop in my LinkedIn, anybody who reaches out, I will definitely get in touch with. I'll help anybody, anytime, anywhere. So I really encourage people, don't be shy about reaching out for help, even if it's just one tool, one part of EOS. There's some absolutely amazing businesses that have self-implemented EOS, which I think is just amazing. So there's some guys out there that need help. Don't hesitate, just reach out. I'm here for really anybody anytime. So I mean that sincerely. Really grateful. Thank you, Daniel, for having me on. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Been a great pleasure, mate, and always good to chat. Thank you, and look forward to catching up soon.
Thanks, Daniel.